All right, hey, we're going to knock out chapter 3 here, looking at the Bronze Age and the Iron Age for Western Civ 1. We'll talk about the Bronze Age. Bronze is an alloy. It's made of two different metals, tin and copper. They're melted together and it creates a new material. It creates a stronger metal than tin by itself or copper by itself. And so bronze from 3000 BCE to 1100 BCE was really the strongest metal that humans could make at that time, right? And so it's mass produced, let's say, because it's going to allow us to change warfare. It's going to allow us to change agriculture because we're able to make stronger pieces of metal for swords and spears and armor and plows. And so it's going to have this effect over all of civilization. Obviously military, you got, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's going to make everything a little bit more it's going to make everything stronger and better, right? But it's also going to allow for the birth of widespread empire. Now we talked a little bit about Mesopotamia and the trouble that the early Mesopotamian cities had in growing and conquering other people because of the lack of siege equipment and the lack of superior weapons. Everybody basically had kind of the same stuff. Now all of a sudden, when bronze comes about, you have this situation where if you have rich empires or rich cities, they can afford to trade for copper and they can afford to get tin and they can make bronze weapons where other people can't. And so they're fighting with, basically sticks and stones or whatever. And so the larger, more wealthy empires are going to conquer smaller people regardless if they're walled cities or not. And so you're going to start to see larger bronze empires pop up. And so we look down there at the bottom, we have Greece and Anatolia and Cana and Mesopotamia, kind of combining those together. And then Egypt is going to be a major bronze empire as well. And so we can look at kind of that, what we're seeing there, right? All right. So the Hittites are up in modern day Turkey. They're going to rule for about, I don't know, 600 years. And they're going to conquer some of Mesopotamia. They're going to move into like Syria and the Middle East, and they're going to continue to spread until they run into Egypt. And that's roughly the time that spread is going to stop. And so the Hittites are going to take Syria, and Egypt is going to hold on to Cana, or modern day Israel, right? And so we're going to have that split. And so the Hittites are kind of interesting in the fact that when they conquered an area, they didn't necessarily force their culture or their religion or their ideas on the people they conquered. What they would do is they would assimilate those ideas into their culture. And so like when they would take a new place, they would just kind of gobble up everybody. And it's interesting because not a lot of people do that. Like if you conquer somebody, you make them believe in your gods, you make them follow your science, you make them do your stuff. And so you have a different change here. And so we have some of the Hittite religion story, and I'm going to let you read that on your own in the notes. I'm just going to skip over that to try to keep this video a little bit shorter. And so we can also look in the Bronze Age as it starts to spread into Greece. And so the Greece during this time, this is going to be Bronze Age Greece. This is not necessarily going to be, it's not going to be Classical Age Greece. It's not going to be Athens and Sparta and Plato and Aristotle and democracy and police and all those things. This is the early stages of Greek society, and so you're going to have two major empires during this time. You're going to have the Minoan Empire, which is on the island of Crete, which kind of hangs out here off of the coast of Greece, and then you're going to have the Mycenaean Empire, which is on the mainland of Greece. Now, both of these empires are going to be seagoing people. They're going to get a lot of their food from the sea. They're going to get a lot of their wealth from the sea, the trade and whatever. But there's a huge difference, and it's kind of interesting because the Minoan culture is a hugely peaceful people. They don't necessarily have even fortifications on their islands. They have a merchant navy that deals in trade. But that's it. And you know, you have this these major palaces that are connected, and thousands of people live together in this peace and harmony in this weird way, and they form a system of writing called Linear A that's never really been figured out, and then they have Linear B that comes about later. And there's some evidence that the Mycenaean or the Minoan Empire is actually ruled by women. And so, you know, it's definitely different from the rest of early civilization, I suppose, and the fact that they're not concentrating on warfare and spreading. They're concentrating on peace and trade, where the Mycenaeans are totally different. They're very warlike. And these are going to be the main characters in the traditional Greek storylines. So like the Iliad, the Odyssey, you're going to read about these guys from Homer and what it really kind of means to be Greek. And this is kind of the start of Greece in that classical age, right? They're going to conquer the Minoan Empire, and they're going to take Linear A and they're going to create Linear B. And I think I screwed that up when I was chatting with you earlier there. But and so they're going to have that, and this is going to be, again, the Mycenaeans are going to be your typical Greek warriors here with their shields and their physiques and their bronze swords, right? And the Mycenaeans, they would have to trade with other people because Greece during that time, Greece is very rocky and the soil is very poor, and so they haven't developed agriculture that's sufficient to feed everybody. And so they're going to have olive trees, and they're going to crush up olive oil, and they're going to trade it with people, and they're going to have grapes, and they're going to make wine, and they're going to send it out, and they're going to trade, right? And they're going to have this huge merchant navy and this huge warrior navy that's going to go out, and they're going to be a very, very, very powerful kingdom. Now, it's totally different from Greece that we're going to talk about in the next unit, because the Mycenaeans, this is definitely a very top-heavy civilization in which the nobles, or the people that have power in the Mycenaean Empire, are going to be very, very wealthy, but everybody else is just working for basically like a warlord at that point, right? They're just farmers. They're just subject to what everybody wants to do, and this elite class kind of rules everybody and tells them to do what they want to do. And so we kind of talked about Egypt a little bit during the Bronze Age, slightly, and that's going to give us there. But like the interesting thing about the Bronze Age is the fact that there's not a ton of tin that's available to the cradle of civilization, right? Not Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, modern day Turkey. There's not a lot of tin that's available right there, and the only mines that they have are going to come out of Afghanistan, which is a pretty long way away. And so what the Bronze Age really does is it makes this international or global, or for us it would be regional in that area, but it would be like this trade becomes horribly important to these people, because they have to get their hands on tin in order to make bronze, because if you can't make bronze, you're going to be conquered by people that can. And so that becomes very, very problematic, right? But somewhere around 1200 BCE or 1100 BCE, we have a century's worth of drought. We have an entire generation of drought and famine that's going to come across the earth. And so people are going to start to leave large cities, because if there's not enough food to feed everybody, we kind of chatted about this, without food you don't have social distinctions, and so without enough food there's no reason to stay into a kingdom or a city or wherever with a king and a priest and whatever, because everybody's looking for food, and so it's easier to grow just a small amount of food for you and your family and not share it with everybody. And so people start to leave major cities and find pieces of ground and set up small farms. And when people start to exit civilizations, bandits start to come in and attack different places. And so even large empires that have their hands on large quantities of brass weapons, they don't necessarily have the manpower anymore, or maybe they lose some weapons to some of these bandits, and all of a sudden they have bronze. And so you start to see this civilization, or this worldwide stability of trade networks or whatever start to fall apart. And it's this failure of this trade system and this instability within large empires that the Bronze Age is basically just going to come to a grinding halt somewhere around 1100 BCE. And so civilization is going to pause. It's just going to hit the brakes real hard for a short period of time, right? Because they're going to lose access to tin. And so while they lose access to tin, the metalsmiths are going to be sitting around during this time frame and like, all right, well, I don't have tin and copper to put together anymore, and copper is pretty flimsy without it. So let's start to experiment with other things. And they have iron ore that's available to them at different locations. They start to melt this down and mess around with it. And they take on this idea of iron, and different empires start to use iron instead of bronze, and they start to replace that because it turns out that iron is actually stronger than bronze, and you don't need that alloy to put the two things together, right? And so this idea of iron starts to spread to different places, and it's not like today where if you get a great idea, you throw it up on the internet and or social media or whatever, and everybody jumps on it and everybody's doing it, right? The ancient world, the ancient world takes time for ideas to spread and go from other cultures to other places. And so this idea of the use of iron takes a long time to get from different places. And so let's say like it kind of does start in the Middle East, and then it starts to expand outward, but it takes 500 years for it to get all the way into Egypt for the Egyptians to start using iron, and it takes Greece 300 years to adapt to that, right? And so it takes some time for this idea. And so the Canaanites in Cana, they they're really this first empire that comes about that uses this idea during the Iron Age, and they start to do that. And the Phoenicians are the first empire that really kind of comes out of this Canaanite culture, right? And the Phoenicians are very interesting in the fact that they're very similar to the Minoans, and the fact that they're not very warlike. They probably do. They do have they do have an army, they do have things, but they're very skilled at sea travelers, and so they make more money with trade than they do with conquest. And so like when you make more money peacefully, it makes more sense to avoid war. And so the Phoenicians are interesting in the fact that they're such skilled sailors that there's claims that they sail around Africa. Sometime in the, I don't know, like 1100 BCE, they sail around the Horn of Africa, and they go into India and Asia, and they experiment with all that, right? And they establish these colonies all over the Mediterranean, and they have trade all over here, and you can kind of see that. Excuse me. All right. And the Phoenicians, their most important outpost is going to be in Carthage in North Africa, and so that's going to be, you have the Phoenician homeland kind of in Cana, and then you have the birth of Carthage. Carthage that's going to be kind of a thorn in the side of the British at this time, not the British, the Romans here in the future. Okay, and so like while the Phoenicians, they're focused on sailing and trade, and they have this huge network, their most important contribution to Western civilization isn't trade, and isn't sailing or knowledge or whatever. It's going to be their writing system, because the Phoenicians are actually going to have something. They're going to create basically a phonetical alphabet. They're going to create an alphabet that's based on syllabic sounds, right? So different characters represent sounds, and so the Greeks and the Romans are going to adopt this idea. Instead of having like big picture graphs or hieroglyphs, hieroglyphics like the Egyptians, the Phoenicians are going to have basically letters and sounds that we in modern world would be familiar with. The Phoenicians are also going to coin money, and so they're going to take a pre-measured lump of gold, like however much gold is used in a specific coin, and they would put them into coins, and they would call them starters. And this revolutionizes trade, because now all of a sudden you can use currency to buy things instead of just a barter system, and or a rough idea of what is what gold or silver might be worth. Okay. All right. And so, you know, this is going to increase trade and tax collection. There's a picture of what a starter looks like. But the biggest impact that any of these Iron Age civilizations are going to have on anybody is going to come from the Hebrew culture. And the Hebrew culture obviously is not going to be warfare or trade or money or language or whatever. It's going to be religion, and the Hebrews are the first religion to practice, or the first major religion, I suppose, to practice monotheistic religion, monotheism, the worship of one God, right? And so and so the religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all share roots in this idea of monotheism. And, you know, arguably they all worship, quote unquote, the same God, you know, the God of Abraham. Now, some people will get into religious arguments over that. I'm just going to leave it there. It's the God of Abraham. And all three of them look at Abraham as their founder or their patron saint, one of their patron saints. Okay, and so one of the main source of information that we have about the Hebrews and the Hebrew people is the Hebrews' own Bible, the Torah, that's written over, you know, over generations and hundreds of years, and it's collected stories and wisdoms and whatever. The problem this presents for historians is the fact that, all right, this is a Hebrew Bible, it's a Hebrew holy work, and it's going to tell Hebrew history, but it's going to tell it in such a slanted way that it can't necessarily always be credited as historically accurate. Now, historians will use the Bible for time frames, and they'll find find mentions of kings and queens or kings or empires or events, and then they'll look for corresponding sources that will confirm that as well. And so it can be, the Hebrew Bible can be used as a historic document. There's just other steps that have to go into it to make sure that it's accurate, right? There's allegations that many stories out of the Bible are taken from Mesopotamian legends, like Moses is going to be very, very similar to the Akkadian tradition, like Sargon and the Akkadian tradition. You have the flood story that's very similar to the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the flood story appears in basically all major Mesopotamian stories. So like you can rest assured that a major flood did happen at some point. Now you have to pick your source, right? But one of the big differences, and you're going to read about this in the assignments for this unit, is where the Mesopotamian gods, the gods of Mesopotamia, even the gods of Egypt, are cruel really for no reason. Like they bring down punishment, they punish people for their own whims or whatever. The Hebrew God typically punishes for a specific reason, and you guys are gonna read the book of Jonah, or passages from the book of Jonah, and you know, God, the Hebrew God goes to one of his prophets, Jonah, and he tells him, hey, you need to go to the city and you need to preach to them or tell them that bad things are going to happen if they don't change their ways. And of course, Jonah, like most of us, when somebody tells us to do something, we do the absolute opposite. And so he hits the road and hops in a boat and tries to sail off. Well, God sends this horrible storm that swallows the boat, or it's going to swallow the boat, sink the boat, and the sailors are like, what's happening? And Jonah's like, oh, it was me, I'm running from God. And they take him, they throw him off the boat, and a whale eats him, and the storm stops. And then eventually Jonah repents, and the whale spits him up on the beach, and then Jonah goes and does what he should have done in the first place, is follow the word of God, right? And so you see a difference there, where God's actually invested in the Hebrews, and he's not just being mean for a specific reason, or for just no reason whatsoever, right? So somewhere, we go back here, somewhere around 1600, the Hebrews moved to Egypt to escape a famine. Somewhere around 1300, Moses leads the Hebrews out of Egypt. Those are facts that pop. Those are stories that pop up in the Bible that can be documented as well, right? And so before Moses, the Hebrews had this covenant with God where they would get circumcised, and that would show that everybody that they were Hebrew. After the Exodus out of Egypt, now there's 10 commandments that the Hebrews have to follow to be the people of God, right? To continue on. And so you have circumcision plus that. And so you start to see a little bit of growth there. We can go back into Hebrew history here. You look at Abraham, who's commanded by God to leave the city of Ur around 1900 BCE, and he wanders around as a nomad. And he's promised descendants. He's promised numerous descendants, and his wife is old, and he questions that, and it's going to cause all kinds of different problems. But eventually, the Hebrews, they settle in Israel. They have conflicts. And we have the appointment of the kings of Saul and David and then Solomon, and we have this Temple of Solomon. It's going to become very important to the Jews because that's the place that God actually lives. And so once the temple is constructed, it's believed that God actually exists inside there. We talked about kings or whatever in earlier in the last module, in which kings would organize labor efforts. And so Solomon would demand 25% of everybody's labor to build the Hebrew to build this temple, right? And so we have this, and you have King David that comes along, and him and Solomon would support the priesthood. So there's this kind of this theocracy that gets created between the government and the religion. Israel is right in the middle of the Middle East, and so you have this trade coming in, and then they get very wealthy, but they're a relatively small kingdom. And after the death of Solomon, the kingdom of Israel divides, and you have 12 tribes of Israelites. 10 of them leave to form the nation of Israel, and 2 of them stay, and they form Judea, and they're the ones that are going to keep Jerusalem and keep this idea of monotheism and Judaism alive. And there's going to be a lot of conflict between Judea and Israel. And so we have this, right? The north is going to be stronger and richer, and their city is going to be Samaria. And so, like, if you guys remember your Sunday school lessons, you have the picture, the Good Samaritan that was looked down upon by the Jewish people. You're going to have these polytheistic. They're going to start to accept the gods of other Mesopotamian cultures, while Judea is going to keep Judaism. Is going to keep Judaism pure. And so the Assyrians are going to come in, and they're going to conquer Egypt, conquer Israel somewhere around 722. And Judea is going to withstand the Assyrian assault because they're able to pay off bribes, and they're really kind of not all that important because they're relatively small. And so they pay off a lot of bribes over time. At some point around 586 BC, the Babylonians come in and they conquer Jerusalem, and they exit. You see what's called the Babylonian exile, where they take tens of thousands of Jews and they deport them to Babylon. And this is where you have Daniel and in the lion's den and all that stuff, where they're held in captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar. And then somewhere shortly thereafter, in 538, Cyrus the Great, one of the great Persian emperors, conquers Babylon. He allows the Jewish people to return back to their homeland, right? And then in 1030 CE, the Romans come through, and they're going to destroy Jerusalem during this time frame. And so this is interesting. But one of the things that's interesting about Judaism is it's one of the first religions really to get separated from its location. And so when the Babylonians come through and they take all these people out of Jerusalem, well, the priests are copying down their sacred text into these these rolls that they're going to call the Torah, and so you're going to have this, and they're going to write and write and write about the Jewish ways and the Jewish religion. So all of a sudden it becomes a mobile religion. And you're going to have these prophets come about, and they're going to basically say, hey, Jerusalem's going to come back if we only keep the course, right? And it kind of comes true because of Cyrus the Great. And so we have this devotion to a God that comes about. The Torah is written down. You have Hebrews are gonna, they turn away from God, there's going to be destruction. You have the Babylonian conquest, and then if you stay with God, then you're going to be freed. And so you have Cyrus the Great, and so you have this because this conquest of movement of the Jews, the conquest of Jerusalem, the conquering of Jerusalem, the movement of the Jews out of the holy city, kind of breaks away this idea that God is only in Solomon's temple, but he can be anywhere. He can be worshipped everywhere. And he's not only, he's omnipresent, and he's omniscient, like, so he knows everything and he's everywhere. And so you have this birth of a mobile religion with Hebrew, from the Hebrews, and with Judaism. Okay. The Assyrians, as far as empires, I don't know if I have a picture of them. Okay, so the Assyrians are going to be the other empire that's going to come out of this area. Let's see if I can go all the way back. Sorry. The Assyrians are going to be this other empire that's going to come out of the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, that's going to take over large portions of of the Middle East, and they're going to actually come in, and they're going to take away from the Hittites and into Egypt. And so the Assyrians are kind of interesting in the fact that where are we at? Back here. They're really they're the only state that survives from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age, mostly because of their location, that they're closest to modern day Afghanistan. They're closest to those 10 mines where they can gain access to that. And the Assyrians are a modern day military, or not a modern day, they're an ancient military civilization. They put all of their resources into building military might, and they go out and they conquer people, and that's what they do. And during this time frame, the Assyrians are the strongest, most capable military, and the strongest, most capable empire, and they're going to force their will on other people. So they live kind of close to the Eurasian steppe, where you have the steppe people that would come in and attack people in Mesopotamia. And so the Assyrians grow up basically fighting. And so when they do, they become stronger militarily as they begin to organize. They put their empire's funds into military. They go on yearly military expeditions, and so they're going to go out and 1 year they're going to go to the north and they're going to conquer X amount of territory, and then they're going to come back and plant and harvest and whatever, and the next year maybe they go south or east or west or whatever. And so they're constantly looking for more to spread their empire each year and take over more and more land. The Assyrians are horribly ruthless. If people try to resist being conquered by the Assyrians, they might just kill everybody in a town, or they might, if a king is horribly defiant towards the Assyrians, they might just take him out and skin him alive in front of everybody. When I say skin him alive, I actually mean that, like they're going to cut his skin off of his body in front of his subjects. And so other kings and other rulers would hear this, and they'd be like, ooh, I don't want that to happen to me. And so they would either pay tribute to the Assyrians, or they would look to negotiate peace instead of fighting Assyrian conquest. The Assyrians are the first army to use a permanent cavalry and have men on horseback all the time. They're gonna pick up ideas from the central steppe of Asia, which is going to be really, really important, because the central steppe is where the Mongols are going to come out of. Couple thousand years in the future from where we are, but these barbarians that have been, they're traveling herds of people that are on horseback, and they're developing their horse skills all throughout this time. And so the Assyrians are going to see this and be like, hey, that's a great idea. And so they're focus is on taxation of places that they conquer, and they're going to take that money and they're going to stick it back in the military. They're not looking for infrastructure or education or any of those types of things. The Assyrians are going to conquer the Middle East by 671 BCE. They're going to move into Egypt and Nubia. And so in 671, the Assyrians are the first empire to conquer both the Tigris, or hold both the Tigris and the Euphrates River and the Nile River, all at the same time, right? I talked about how cruel they were. The Assyrians would build these huge monuments to themselves. And so like when historians will go through the desert and they'll find these big pillars that are raised to Assyrian conquest, the kings are going to talk about how wonderful they are with themselves, right? And that's kind of going to just bring us there. Yeah, somewhere around 609 BCE, the Assyrians are going to be overthrown by a series of rebellions, just like everybody else. Their empire gets a little bit too big; they can't quite control it, and so you're going to have a revolt. The Babylonians are going to rise up again, and you're going to have this new Babylonian empire that's gonna come around. And so that kind of gets us through that Iron Age, Bronze Age look. The Bronze Age is going to establish a global trade network, and then it's going to fall apart. And then the Iron Age is going to come about, and it's going to allow for military empires like Assyria. You're going to see the Hebrews come about during this time frame and start this Judeo-Christian tradition, the tradition of Judaism that's going to transform into Judeo-Christian ethics that are going to have lasting implications on Western civilization. So I hope you guys picked up something there. If you have any questions, reach out to me, and I will see you here shortly for chapter 4. Peace.